Good morning. This is the Como Vanguard podcast. I am Nick Knoth, and I'm joined here with my co-host,
David Lile. I'm sorry, I didn't get the cue here.
So, bad timing. He looked down as I pointed at him, but we can edit that in post. We don't have to worry about that. And as always, we are here to discuss city council, city politics, city policy making. Last night, city council had their meeting, and we are joined, as always, with a special co-host, special guest co-host, Ward 5 Councilman Don Waterman.
Nice to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely. We appreciate you taking the time. Fortunately, last night, not too late of a meeting.
Yep, that was good. And that went a little longer than I think we anticipated. We got involved in the animal discussions that ran, like I said, took up a lot more time than I think anybody anticipated.
I agree. I jinxed myself last night when watching it. I told my wife ahead of time, I was like, I think this meeting will be done before 9:00. And then, of course, animal control came up, and here we are.
Before we go any further, you have always asked for reaction and input and responses to our first few programs, so you got one.
Yeah.
And I want to tackle that. You shared that with me beforehand, but go ahead and share that because this goes back a couple of programs. I can't remember who we were talking to when we talked about this.
It does. So thank you. As David's saying, we welcome questions, comments, concerns. You can go to comovanguard.com, submit those for the show, and we will answer them or address them. So the first one we got from a gentleman in Ward 4 who wishes to remain anonymous, and we respect that. He says, David suggested that council members should not be allowed to join meetings remotely and certainly should not be eligible to vote if they did. Why should the council be any different than the MU curators who meet remotely the majority of the time and are able to vote when they do? The same is true of most large corporations now. That's the comment. And I think Dave and I both have thoughts on this because there may be some confusion there.
Yes. First of all, of certain things that have transpired during these programs, there might have been other ones I would have expected to receive some feedback on. But that one, I remember the topic coming up because it was part of the city council talking about how to restructure certain things. I didn't have a strong opinion on it. I don't know what I voiced, and I certainly don't have a problem with people joining remotely. I don't think I ever said I didn't like that idea. I questioned why anybody would question why you couldn't vote remotely. So again, I don't remember who the guest was. I'm definitely saying that I didn't have a real strong feeling on this, and I don't have a problem with people joining remotely. So I don't know what I said that offered that confusion, or maybe I took a bump on the head and right now I'm changing my mind 180 degrees. But do you recall me saying that I was against remote participation in the council meeting?
I don't. I don't either, but maybe this is just a simple confusion in terms of as we're all talking. Sometimes I imagine it can be hard for folks to follow our logic or what we're saying, especially as, there's three people talking. So I kind of chalk it up to that. Yeah, and this is our opportunity to clarify that.
Yeah. And plus there are times when people ask questions that may sound like opinions, and that might have been one of those circumstances. I appreciate the feedback, and I appreciate any of the feedback. And trust me, it is not the first time either I have been understood or maybe I've said something that somebody misinterpreted. Hopefully it's not going to be the last. I hope there are other times when people will say, what do you say?
Absolutely. So again, folks, we appreciate the feedback, regardless of what it is. We want your engagement. So go to comovanguard.com, click on the link that allows you to submit a question or comment. We love it. Thank you to this gentleman out of Ward 4 for doing that.
Sure.
We appreciate the comment. With that, we will pivot to last night's council meeting, which featured several items of concern and certainly spent the most time on something I don't think any of us thought would be the highlight of the evening in terms of where council spent their most time. David, do you have a preference on where we start?
Well, I want to start because I didn't see anything in regard to the work session. And I'd like to ask the councilman, who's our guest, Don Waterman, to just comment on the work session. I thought you did a good job, Nick, in the print version of the Como Vanguard, saying that that was an important discussion about affordable housing. And I thought some of the numbers were interesting. So, as I'm just asking, as a person who was not there for the pre-council meeting, what the councilman's takeaway was of that, and what you heard, and what made you react positively or with questions.
Not so much questions. I think I generally view those as just kind of information gathering or taking in information as provided. I think, and it goes back to the affordable housing discussion that is ongoing here in Columbia. The joint city-county housing survey had some of that data. I think one of the things that to me, thinking back on it, is for all of the talk that we need to be doing more about it, there's actually been a lot of construction in the last 2 to 3 years in housing and affordable housing. The thing that surprised me was FY25 were over 500 units of multifamily housing that was approved. We're making progress. Yes, it's a concern. It's something that we have to look at. I was happy to see that it's moving forward through discussion, planning and zoning about adopting a cottage lot standard so it doesn't have to go through all the extra steps, Board of Adjustment and so on that it does now. Smaller lots, smaller homes, which will bring the price down, especially for those entry-level buyers. If you're talking about a young couple, no children yet, or maybe one child, a 2-bedroom, 1-bath rather than the traditional 3-bedroom, 2-bath, which has kind of become the standard. The smaller house obviously should be less cost, and a great way to get your foot in the door for home ownership or if it's a rental unit.
The only question I would have in addition to what we're talking about, and again, this isn't a major item, but I guess when I was looking at some of these numbers, I was wondering, like, what's being built on Park Street? I mean, they tore down, I think, downtown, all of the units there that were done by the Columbia Housing Authority.
Yeah, that is
rebuilding
Columbia Housing.
those, and they're beautiful.
Yep.
That's coming up right there.
Yep.
And then also thinking about what was at Garth and is it Sexton
Yep.
with the new developments there. Are those included in this?
Yes,
these
they
are
are.
part of this.
Yeah, I specifically asked that question if they included Columbia Housing permits, and they do. And if you look at what they're doing, like the projects that you just mentioned, they're going gangbusters. I mean, Randy Cole, the organization he's put together between grants and fundraising and everything, it's like, if anybody should be in charge of housing, it should be Randy because he's doing a great job.
I have another question. I mean, if I said I only had one, but I have another one. Along Providence, kind of as you're heading north on Providence towards Hickman High School, there's another area there that I think is near like Kilgore's Pharmacy. Is that city?
That
too?
Central Missouri Community Action, CMCA.
Okay.
That is their Providence Landing project, which has, I don't remember the exact number, but about a dozen housing units, affordable and beautiful placement on Providence, certainly.
So now is the city also looking for then, because I understand what you just mentioned in Columbia Housing Authority, but affordable housing, and to tackle the housing needs, the private industry is going to have to cooperate with this.
Oh yeah, they are. They are. And that's an ongoing discussion. And again, it was mentioned last night at the information session. You mentioned that's part of their ongoing discussion is to work with and have conversations with the development community. What can the city do to make it easier and cheaper for them to build, either own or rent, to address the whole affordability issue?
If we move on then into the main portion of the evening and the main meeting, Nick, I don't know about you, but how do you find audit reports? Those are
I found it more interesting than perhaps some would, to contrast with the rest of council that we'll get to in terms of animal control forthcoming. I thought there would have been more time spent on that than on animal control, but that's just one person's opinion. I think the audit report showed that. And for folks who are listening, every single year, the city has an external auditor who they sign a contract with to audit the city's finances, assesses, accounting, all these things as a form of independent control and accountability on the city's finances. This was for 5, and I think the city performed well in the report. The consultants, AGH advisors, didn't find, quote unquote, any material weaknesses. There were a couple of things that they had recommendations on around, better accounting for federal dollars and grant money, which is an ongoing issue with the city, is my understanding. This is not the first year that's happened. So I'd love your thoughts on that, Don.
No, I agree. I mean, it was a good report. There was only the one finding that about accounting, apparently, the report that was initially submitted, they had to make corrections to it. So basically it was like, hey, clean up the process so that, it's right the first time. And again, it was minor, and the city, they had a chance to provide a response, which they already have. They're putting together a guide as far as this. They're going to do a mid-year reconciliation rather than waiting until the end of the year, which I think is prudent. And then some trainings. I said before with some of the other previous audits, that's why you do audits. I'm retired military, so you were always dealing with inspections or whatever. And that was part of it, was to come in and say, okay, how are you doing X firefighting, for example. We did fire when I was on ship. They'd come in, we'd run our fire drills, and they'd say, okay, this is good, this is good, this is great, this could use some work, and here's where. And a city audit is the same thing. It's like, where are we doing good, and where could we be better? That was one area they identified we could be better. But overall, given that it covered, again, no major findings, it was good.
Ward 1 Councilwoman Valerie Carroll asked a good question, which was, why doesn't the city use internal auditors instead of external? Which is, I think, I think it's a good question for those who haven't had that answered before. Frankly, therein the city's response was, well, two things. One, there's kind of better accountability by having an external auditor perform it rather than, running the risk in a bad scenario of an internal auditor being compromised or otherwise under pressure from city leadership to do one thing or the other. Not to mention the practicality, as Matthew Liu, the finance director, pointed out, which is hiring an internal audit team would be quite expensive, especially given that in those types of roles, the city is not remotely competitive for what a experienced auditor could be making working for an auditing firm who does those types of things.
Yeah. We didn't get specific numbers, but he made it sound very much like it's more cost benefit to us to hire the outside than it is to do it internally. And again, doing it internally, yes, there's a whole question about control or whatever, and it's the same thing. And I'll go back to my firefighting example. My last ship, I was part of the damage control training team. So yes, we ran all the fire drills, but you need that outside and that's fine. But then you can fall into habits over time and not realize it, but you slip into bad habits, and you need that external set of eyes to look at it and say, hey, this is good, but you're kind of slipping over here, or this could be done better. No, I think we almost have to have an outside set of eyes do these audits.
I want to pick up on one thing that you said, Nick. It's in regard to the audit, but it's not exactly what you're talking about. And I want to preface this by saying that I am not saying that people are not due this money, but you included in the Como Vanguard, Nick, the accounting for compensated absences, which would be people who have worked, who have not used their sick leave yet, if I'm understanding this right, or their vacation, but the approximately added in liability, meaning that if everybody all at once said, I'm quitting, pay me for what I've not used as my sick leave or my vacation, that's just overwhelming number to me, $14 million, and that's added liability. That's a lot.
To clarify on that, because I did have somebody else already ask me this morning, that is not new dollar or new debt or liability that didn't already exist. Okay. It is the city accounting for it more accurately.
Got it.
Based off new and revised standards that they are being held to by the auditors, right? So it's really just more transparent so that they have an answer to, well, what is the liability when it comes to what you owe people if and when they need it?
And it's not going to happen. Nobody's ever going to not everybody is going to say, I'm done, give me what is due me. And again, I'm saying, I understand. I've worked in a place where once you retire or you resign or whatever, you want what is due you through your standards of the organization or the company that you're working for. And I think the city owes that to people if they don't use that time. So I'm not saying that it isn't owed. I was just surprised that it added up to $14 million.
Well, I guess it says we've got some good dedicated people that do their jobs without taking their vacation, which, then they should be compensated for. And like you said, I know when I retired from my full-time job, rather than taking the vacation time, we had just rolled over to our new fiscal year. So I had my vacation time, which they give to you at the beginning of the year. And rather than taking that and getting paid for the next 2 or 3 pay cycles, I said, nope, just give me the check.
Yeah. All right.
I think it's also a good sign for the city in that one of the things cities in general are known for is they have a lot of staff that stick around for a long time, right? Like that is just the nature of government service. People are committed to their work. It's a place they want to be. The benefits are decent as are shown here. And so they're able to build it up over time. And it's not uncommon at all. I feel like you see this, especially when the department directors retire, that they have, I'm making up a number just for exaggeration purposes, but it feels like they have like 5 years of sick time saved up after serving for 20 or 30 years with the city of Columbia, and they get paid out for that, right? And that's something they deserve. So I think, again, this is representative of a good thing, ultimately, that the city has benefits that it takes seriously for its staff. And now, in an accounting and auditing purposes, it's being more accurately reflected in the liabilities, which it is technically a financial liability.
Yeah. We jump past some of the early stuff and go right to the animals and fowl.
David, I'm going to let you run with it.
No, I mean, I'm just asking. There were a couple of things there, but they were easily passed. I mean, the Rothwell Park improvements and then something on Quail Drive. So let's go to I guess it's, everybody should know that watched last night, Chapter 5. Chapter 5 must be a long one. It's
Yeah, I mean,
a good chapter in the book.
yeah, during the discussion, I actually pulled it up, and yeah, it's its own chapter, animals and fowl. And, so this started, as I understand it, and plead a little ignorance, I didn't realize that we had even asked to have this reviewed, or maybe somebody else had kicked it off. But, the overall code hadn't been reviewed thoroughly since the 60s. And so I think it started as basically, let's take a look at it. There was some language cleanup, like there were some things like talking about canines that said Columbia Police Department or law enforcement animals, but it just said Columbia Police Department. Well, acknowledging that we may have Boone County sheriffs, maybe even highway patrol. They live here in town. They bring their dogs home with them. So they changed that to just simply law enforcement, or some cleanup like that, maybe some gender neutral on some of the language as well. Some of it was simplification, was kind of where it started. Then, yeah, it came around then, and what generated all the discussion last night was when he got to talking about cats and cat owners and cat colonies and feral cat colonies and fostering. And that's kind of where, a large part of what we were talking about tethering animals outside, you have to give them shelter and food, animal abuse, things like that. That didn't even enter into the discussion. It all got into cats and the number of cats and when you have to get permits. And yeah, went on a lot longer than any of us anticipated, I think.
Seemed like the gist of it that really came out, as you just said, was whether you should have to pay $50 to have more than 4 animals, I guess, in your house or in your control
Yes.
as a pet. I understand that's one of the issues. Another issue was feral cats, which I didn't totally understand the feral cats, other than the fact that we did learn what TNR is. I did not know what TNR was until, and thank goodness one of the speakers came up after. One speaker used TNR a lot, and then the other one came up and said that means,
Yeah, trap, neuter, release.
Trap, neuter, and
Did you hear the mayor? She said, thank you.
I heard the mayor say that, and I was saying thank you also as I was watching this at home. Yeah, trap, neuter, and then I think it's return or something like that, because I was thinking it was going to be a release also, but it's return. So that was part of the conversation. During the comments, I'll say this as we get into this a little bit more and to talk about it, I had the feeling that I was glad I didn't live in certain neighborhoods. And I don't mean that to be disrespectful, but after hearing some of what is happening in certain neighborhoods, I just said, I'm glad I don't live there, because I think one voice that wasn't heard last night was from those who would say, I find it to be disconcerting to live next to people that would have 10 or 20 or more animals. Cats, you're right, it was centered on cats. I think that is a voice that needs to be heard. And I understand the voices that were very adamant saying, I'm doing a public service by taking care of these animals.
Yeah, and you're right. And I don't know why they weren't there. I don't know. Maybe they felt intimidated because, as was demonstrated last night, pets, but especially cats, people get very passionate about it. I mean, we don't now, but my wife and I previously one time we had 3, but, we've been pet owners. Right now we're petless and quite frankly enjoying it. But, I understand the passion about, pet owners and that. And yeah, this.
I'll add, going to your question, David, about and Don, I think you both mentioned this about where was that other voice? 2 things. One, that voice was really only coming from the health department staff, because they saw it, and this was core to the discussion, was from their perspective, before becomes a public health issue, which is reflected in that $50 per animal overage, because of the process they're proposing, which is accounting for that, making sure there's documentation on rabies shots and all these other types of things, and that takes staff time. And then the flip side of that, to me, in terms of why wasn't there your average Joe or Jane showing up to be like, hey, as David was saying, I'm not against necessarily, people I'm talking about, but I do find it disconcerting, to use your word, that maybe my neighbor could have, to quote somebody last night, a feral cat colony living at their house. Honestly, I think this falls under the broader subject we talk about sometimes, which is, I think most people probably, if they saw this was coming up on the agenda, whether in reporting or otherwise, probably didn't see this as an issue that they needed to go speak on because they didn't think it would be controversial. And
Yeah,
here we
quite
are, where,
possibly.
as often happens, you have one side of an issue, in this case, animal control issues, who are very passionate about it. I would imagine a smaller group, a smaller segment of the community, that they're going to show up because it's personal to them. They're passionate about it, and they're going to be very vocal, as we saw last night.
I think that I'm sorry, but I just thought that, first of all, I want to give credit to the animal control, Kevin, and I know he's got his last name here. I can't remember his
Kevin
last.
Myers.
I thought he did a really good job in answering questions
Mhm.
because, again, as he pointed out, lots of these rules have been on the book since 1964, and they weren't asked to change those. And he also said it is complaint driven, which makes sense in this case. He made a comment somewhere along the way saying if we went out and tried to corral, he didn't use the word corral, but chase down every
Right.
cat, we would be doing that full time. So they're not out to do that. They're out to respond to complaints and respond to those matters. That satisfies me. I understand others would say, well, that is not clear cut as to when you will take action. Well, again, when we had Police Chief Joe Schluty here, she said the same thing in regard to certain things that happen with pedestrians and with drivers. It's complaint driven. They're not out looking to come after certain people. They are just going to say, we have to be fair to all citizens. And if some citizen calls up and says, I've got 20 cats next door to me that don't seem to be taken care of, then animal control will come, but
Will come
not
in.
until.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of just kind of common sense.
Yes.
If you look at, various studies, we've got all kinds of feral cats and whatever in town and communities and whatever. But yeah, they don't have time. We don't have the staff for them to run a trap line trapping, feral cats. Like you said, leave it complaint driven. To me, some of this is common sense. It again, we don't have the staff. We don't have the time to actively search these out. We need complaint driven. When there's a complaint, they come in and look at it. Feral cat colonies. I'll be honest, until we got the brief on this 3 months ago, 2 months ago, whatever it was, I didn't even realize that was a thing that you could feed cats. I mean, yeah, we've got our bird feeders, but okay, we're feral bird colony, I guess, in our backyard. But the feral cat colony, I didn't even realize that was a thing. And then you have the extreme. Lady got up and spoke last night during public comment. It's not a feral. She's got them apparently in her house, and she's got over 20 cats. And she was complaining about the $50 per animal fee would cost her $1,000 a year. So there was a little bit of an extreme that's probably, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that's probably the extreme example here in Columbia, singular. But you've got others with less. So yeah, I think sometimes people want to get wrapped up and they need the nth detail spelled out rather than a little common sense applied. Step back, take kind of quell your emotions, take a step back and say, okay, how is this going to look like in practical application?
One of the other educational things that happened during that discussion was the bringing up fostering. And I have
Mhm.
had a second chance pet, and I understand that there are people, because when I go to look to see, well, is there a dog I'd like to adopt? And I see it's being fostered. One question I wish that had been asked last night was when people are fostering for either the Central Missouri Humane Society or Second Chance or any of the other organizations, how many do they normally foster at one time? I know the question came up, what is the length of time that is a normal
Mhm.
fostering period? But I can't imagine that if I'm fostering for Second Chance, I would have 10 animals there. I would foster one or two, I would think, at a time.
I think that would probably be much closer to the norm than, like you said, 6, 8, 10 animals, two or one or two, maybe three. And again, why are they fostering? So yeah, I agree. One or two is probably much more the norm.
So my own experience in terms of adoption with, like, Central Missouri Humane Society, and I don't know, it's been a long time since I adopted the dog I have now, but at least back then, 5+ years ago now when I adopted our dog, I remember talking to them, and on the adoption side of things, kind of they found it ill-advised for anyone to adopt more than, like, one animal at a time, right? For similar reasons, which is responsibility, making sure you can take care of a pet, and I imagine that's some similar feeling they would have, or policy around fostering, right?
Mhm.
Similarly, I don't have the answer, but I would imagine, based off that experience, if they have that for adoption, which makes sense, I understand that, they would have something similar for their foster care. volunteers who do important work. And I definitely respected Councilwoman Jackie Sample out of Ward 3. I think that was her big thing that she kept bringing up last night and making sure that, I felt like her concern might have been more so that she was worried about maybe the possibility of foster households being targeted or being like mishandled in the case of animal control. But I also think, to David's point on the enforcement being, complaint driven, as everything with the city is, everything is complaint driven. This isn't a police state where they go around 24/7 hunting down rental abuses or, whatever it might be. Um, that provides for discretion, right? That's something that Chief
Yes.
Slutty's talked about. That's something that the team in neighborhood services who handles rental inspections has talked about. It's discretion, which is needed because the world is unique. Every circumstance is a little different. And I think when you start putting every single what if scenario down, you really pigeonhole staff and you create situations where they're forced to penalize somebody who would not have otherwise been penalized if they had discretion. That's a general statement I have, not just for animal control, but for anything that the city council, city staff
Oh,
have an inclination to do that sometimes, and that's something I worry about in general.
yeah. I mean, I think that's a great point, that it's too easy to say this. Whether again, we're talking animal control, and oh, if we have these fosters and they're going to be targeted for having too many, or whether it's a piece of technology, oh, they're going to use it to track whatever or search people out. It's sometimes I think people want to take it to an extreme, and then that's how they want to write ordinances and legislation. And as you said, then it almost becomes where they're forced to take action where they can't apply any discretion.
I think there are two things that are happening during discussion like last night, and we've talked about content, so I know we want to move on and don't make this as long as the discussion was last night. But I think that there were some good points brought up, and so the content. But then I also like to watch when something like that is happening, as it did in the meeting last night. It happens in every meeting, whether it's a city council meeting or other meeting. There is a flow of what is happening. And when Dr. Tom Rose, who is, I guess, the head of the what
The
commission?
Board of Health, I
The
believe.
Board of Health, when he said, and he said it a couple of times, and the final time he said it was when the mayor says, okay, we're going to stop discussing this. We're going to send it back for further discussion and come back correcting some of the things that we're talking about. So it'll come back
Yeah.
maybe in May or whenever that is. And so we can talk about it again then, Nick. But the flow of that, when Tom Rose got up and said, we did not start talking about a $50 charge per animal more than four until late in the process, that was a deal breaker right there. And I think that that made it clear that this was not ready to be voted on.
Yeah, absolutely. Enough animal control for today. I'm sure we'll be talking about it again in 6 months when it comes back. But on a lighter note, what is it? The FIFA Cup
Yep.
is happening in Kansas City in June, I believe.
June and July, I
June and
think, part of
July
June and
this
July.
summer.
July. Yep.
And last night, one of the items that council approved was a special permit during that time frame for the FIFA World Cup to allow bars to stay open a little later, serve alcohol a little longer. And, I think that's great. I don't particularly have an opinion on it myself. I'm just like, as council and staff both said, they don't really know what the demand is from
Mhm.
bars and restaurants downtown who might be interested in this, but we'll find out. And they seem like they put together a simple process. I look forward to seeing how it works.
Before you answer this, Don, so didn't the state pass something saying that bars could stay open 23 hours
23 hours a day.
during this time period, during the FIFA Cup,
They did.
and give cities or other entities opportunity to opt out of that and to put other restrictions on it? So that's why the city was
Yeah,
talking
that's why
about
we were
this.
talking about it last night. And yeah, that was the whole point, was are we going to opt out of it or not? The ordinance as it was originally proposed, and I'm not sure where this came from, but um, it was almost like, well, we don't want this, so we're going to make it very hard to do, where it was like a permit for each day at $100 a pop that you wanted to stay open. And so I'm not sure the origin of that. So yeah, that's what we were discussing last night. I got an email from the Restaurant Association saying, let businesses be businesses. And I agree with that. I'm a proponent of businesses, economic development. I mean, I'm a proponent. So I submitted the question. We have a process to where, as we're council members reading through the agenda, if we have questions on items, we submit them the deadline is early Monday morning, so staff can kind of address our questions and get them back to us before council meeting so that if we want to follow up, sometimes they know we're going to follow up. So I asked the question, why don't we just, let businesses be businesses? And both Chief Saluti and Chief Schaefer said, we need to know so that we can schedule. And it was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. So I was satisfied with that. As Chief Saluti said during her comments last night, their evening shift is 3 p.m. to 3 a.m. Right now, bars, everybody has to be out of the bar by 1:30, so that gets everybody home, and then they can reduce staffing from 3 a.m. on, because historically 3 a.m. to 10 a.m. is our slow time. And we're already still stretched thin at the police department, even though we've made progress on hiring. But so that made sense. They need to know. So in course of discussion, and if Valerie hadn't offered Councilwoman Carroll hadn't offered the amendment, I was going to say, no, one permit, $100 fee, and you specify the dates you want to take advantage of it. And part of the questions that we got back was there's actually only 7 days where there's going to be a late starting game, either 10 or 11 o'clock. 2 hours to play the match. Then it still gives them a little bit to either celebrate or commiserate, and then close down at 2:30. So that was what we ultimately decided on.
It seemed to make sense as that unfolded. For those of us who are not soccer fans, it doesn't make sense that people would need to be celebrating at 3 and 4 in the morning, but I don't appreciate World Cup soccer. So
I don't either.
again,
So
still, and as it's pointed out, those bars that there hasn't been a clamoring saying we've got to have this.
no.
And bars who did do it would have to staff, and that
Mhm,
would be hard to
mhm.
do. And then, as you just pointed out, I think the police chief made a very good point about how business decisions do impact public safety or
Mhm,
the
mhm.
public feel of a
Yeah.
community.
Right.
No, I agree. And in the answer to the question, they said, yeah, we might have some additional economic development or economic benefit, but that doesn't outweigh the public safety aspect of it. So again, the games will be over. Last call, 2 o'clock. Doors close at 2:30. Then that still gets the bar surge out on the way home. If they have to extend the shift, it's going to be a very brief time. To me, it makes sense. And again, if you want to do it, do it. You're not
Right.
obligated to do it, but if
You're
you want to do
opting
it, do
in.
it. You're opting in. So we've spelled out the process. You can opt in. It's not just the bars. Chief Saluti actually made a good point. There are some
Restaurants.
restaurants
Yep.
or food trucks that provide late night snacks to people that have imbibed and, want to have a late night snack.
Yeah, absolutely. It just comes, like you said, it just comes down from the city perspective to managing it. And this is a way for them to track it so that they know what they're managing.
Yeah.
And it seems very reasonable, $100 flat fee for folks, for restaurants, bars, whomever who want to opt into that. Fine by me. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
You know?
And that's everybody's wondering just how much spillover we're going to get.
Right.
I mean, we're kind of being promoted. Additionally, talking about police staffing, Chief Saluti also mentioned that, Kansas City has reached out to us for support for them. But anyway, so yeah, it's curious as to how much we're going to see here, how much spillover. We're kind of in that we're close enough that people could. I mean, I'm guessing I know I have, and I'm guessing the two of you probably have as well, gone to a baseball game or a football game in St. Louis or Kansas City. And then at the end of the game, 10 o'clock, you're close enough you can drive home.
Well, and not to mention, and I was talking to Amy, the CVB director, last night at a council meeting as well about this, that it's not going to take much for Kansas City area to run out of hotel rooms when the World
Yeah.
Cup is happening. and
Oh,
so,
yeah, I'm sure.
and so it once that occurs, and you start looking just at hotels, Columbia is pretty close to Kansas City, especially
Yeah.
the outer outlying parts. So I do think we'll have some impact, but everyone's on the same page, which we'll see what that impact actually is.
Yeah, it may be. Yeah, that's going to be the big thing is we're going to, did we overestimate it, underestimate it, or whatever? Yeah, be
Yeah.
curious to see.
I want to skim past this next thing that happened right after that vote, but ask kind of a frivolous question. Can't you all just go ahead and say anytime that the university power plant needs to have Stewart Road partially closed, they can do it rather than have to vote on it each time? I understand that it needs to come back up each time, but I live in that area where
Hmm.
and when my wife and I were watching the conversation last night, it's like, so what is new? They have closed that more than it's been open over certain time period. So why? And my question was, if you all said no, what's going to
Yeah,
happen
what's going to
then?
happen? Yeah,
Yeah, close it anyway.
yeah, they may, yeah,
It's like, yeah, they're
yeah,
going to do it anyway. So anyway,
Yeah.
that's
Goes back to management. They got to be able to track that that's happening.
I
I
guess,
guess, and what they're
but
doing
like you
is
said, it's you know adjacent to or on university properties.
and heck of a roof if it's going to take that many months to get that roof replaced, because I think it's from coming up this spring until fall.
Something
Yeah,
like that. Yeah. Yeah. Pretty much all
Uh,
summer.
what's next?
Well, the last thing on the agenda that at least that I found noteworthy was the monthly finance report that Matthew Liu and Jim McDonald out of the finance office provided. The just for those
Before
who,
you go to
yeah,
that, let me ask, because I think that you, Mr. Waterman, had a question about when they were talking about write-offs,
yes,
and there were write-offs of $700,000, which was like
grand total.
0.3% of
Yeah,
something like that. And you said, well, that is maybe a small percentage. That sounds like a lot to
it
those of,
does.
and I went and I looked at the report prior and I copied off some, and some of the names on this are amazing. And some of them just keep on repeating over and over
I
again.
know. That's what I didn't quite. I don't understand it, but I don't know. But yeah, when we got the report, I was looking at it ahead of time, and I had asked the question again. Process we have ahead of time. It's like about it, and yeah, that's when they provided that. It's like the industry standard is close to 4%. I think Jim said that is like 4%, and we're actually less than a half a percent. But when you look at the grand total, and that was the first place I went when I saw the list, was okay. Bottom line, it was like 698,000, whatever, $700,000. I'm like, whoa,
cost of doing business.
I guess, but so I asked him, and again, and I think it's in the report,
Mhm.
it goes to a collection agency, and even after we write it off, it stays out there. So I said, do we have any idea if how much of that we've gotten? And they said, no, we do still get some, but no, they weren't keeping that statistic. So, and then I did ask, I said, okay, it's 5 years, we've written it off.
Mhm.
Are they still flagged so that if they come back in 7 years that, yeah,
Right.
we'll connect your utilities, but, we need, pay up first. And Jim said, yes, they do, but they don't keep it indefinitely, just simply for storage space.
Just to connect the dots for anyone who's listening that didn't pick up on what exactly we're talking about, the city has an indebtedness carryover that they have to account for, which is, as we're talking about, as Don just mentioned, that can be folks not paying their utility bills, any number of things that somebody owes in fees or bills to
Yeah,
the city.
Because
there were multiple ones, but the
Right.
biggest one was utilities.
Utilities is the biggest one, of course.
non-utility write-offs was
Yeah,
one also that caught my attention. I'm
Yeah.
thinking
And
non-utility
so it was
write-offs.
just a discussion of how is that handled by the city.
yeah,
And as Don was just saying, they get to a point where the city just has to write it off
yeah,
and
it's
not
5
ex-
years.
not yeah, after 5 years and not expect somebody to come back and pay that bill. And it's
Yeah,
not
and
we're not
again,
talking about
that's
change.
yeah, earlier we talked about the audit. That's just kind of it's an industry practice
Mhm.
that you don't really aware of.
Right. Absolutely.
You were bringing up something that was better, which was the report on, and I thought it was something that was nice, February sales tax use and marijuana tax report, which did show an increase over the year prior. So
Yeah.
that is good news, especially after hearing over the last several weeks, if not months, that sales tax revenue was decreasing.
Yes, it is a good signal for city's
Mhm.
financials. I'm sure council and the financial staff we're happy to see that. We'll see how it holds through the full Q1. I know that in terms of budgeting practices for the city, budget season is coming up on city council here, starting in really feel like it starts in earnest in like April, and that the end of Q2, that being having all of January, February, March financials in the door, heavily influences how city council and city staff prepare the forthcoming fiscal year.
Yeah.
What'll this be? Fiscal year 27
Mhm. Yeah.
budget cycle. They certainly were not optimistic heading into this. I think they're probably now feeling neutral, where before they were probably a little pessimistic. But again, we don't want to jinx ourselves. But yes, as David noted, this financial report going through February showed modest overall growth, contributing to a 3.18% year over year increase in sales and use tax collections. So that's a great sign.
Yeah,
Hopefully
that
it
is good.
continues.
Yeah. Let's hope.
Because I'm sure Don and every other member of council and everybody in the city of Columbia has something they'd like to spend those dollars on.
Well, we just want to get back to where, me personally, I would just like to get back to where we have the sales tax revenue to cover the general fund expenditures without having to go into reserves, because that's not sustainable. So that's something that we have to, I want to get back to that point to where we can cover expenses without reserves. Then we can look at, okay, what's our pet project?
It seems like a sound policy. A good goal to have for the city
Yes.
is to bring in enough money to cover their expenses without going into the reserves.
Deeper in that finance report, I thought it was fun to scroll on down further, and there are several things there in regard to current formal bid proposal workload by purchasing division staff member. That's kind of an interesting that we don't need to talk about. But then I scrolled down even further, and it was talking about utility customer service. I had a experience where I tried to call because the whatever this thing is called that comes with our bills, the city
Mhm.
source, it was talking about, and I haven't understood totally the utilities community solar program. So I called the number that was given on that source to ask more questions. Well, no one was available the first time. The second time I called, the person said, well, let me transfer to somebody who can speak to that directly. That person didn't answer, so I left a message and never got a call back. So it's frustrating, but I see that I'm not the only one because there are abandonment rate percent. I guess that's those of us who are
Mhm.
citizens who give up and say we're not going to continue to pester them with calls. But number of phone calls, 6,004, and how many emails and all these kinds of things. And I like those numbers because it does say that they're trying to be responsive.
Yeah. Yeah, at least somebody's looking at it. Now, whether what action is being taken, yes, I agree. That's something that, it's definitely worth looking at, because I get that complaint, especially if somebody's having an issue with a utility bill. I think the majority of them get resolved quickly because I don't hear from them. But every once in a while, you'll get that one that just gets between the bill and the billing and the customer service just gets completely sideways. And then that's when they reach out to me, and it's like, well, I called so and so on this date and that date. Sometimes they have good notes, which helps. Sometimes it's very general, and I send it on and say, hey, somebody please look into this and get back to this individual and help explain it. That usually at least gives them an answer and lets them feel like and taking care of them, not just feel like it, but yes, being taken care of.
You're not my city council rep, so I guess I should contact my city council rep and say, hey, what's it take to get a call back here?
Yeah.
Well, that's a valid point, a valid question, especially like you said, but about the city's solarized program, because that seems to be a very large sentiment within the community is solarized, renewable, clean, that type of energy. So you would think that that would be a higher priority to answer.
During your general comments, as we skip towards the end, you made the comment, and a couple of others did too. I think you were first, though, talking about the community summit that comes up on March 14th. Tell the importance of that to those who are listening.
Yeah, basically, it's an open house. It starts at 9 o'clock. It's 9 to noon, March 14th. It's at City Hall, and it's an opportunity for you to come in. They will have, and I'm assuming they're going to follow the same format as last year, but you'll have the various departments. You'll have a chance to interact with members from the department. Last year they were doing surveys. They had a board up, and they give you a colored sticker, so your priorities. I know one of them was with the airport. Where do you want to see flights? I think Charlotte and Orlando turned out to be two of the highest ones, and voila, look what happened. Not going to say it happens this year, but as an example, interact with the various departments. Last year was the first year we did it, and I got there a little bit late. Anyway, got there a little bit late, and I walked into City Hall, and it was like, wow, this place was packed. Normally when you do something like this, whether it's a Be Heard things we do, it's 10, 15, 20, 25 people. And that's kind of what I was expecting. I forget what the total count was, but I think it was, I want to say 300 plus. And when I walked in, 200 of them were there at that time. That between council hall chambers and that for the foyer was full. And I thought, this is awesome. Come on out. Again, it's your chance. We do the community survey. We have a firm that does that, statistical analysis, mailed out questionnaires. But this is a chance to come in, kind of, I almost want to say supplement to that, but face to face with the different departments, representatives from departments, questions, give us your comments, give us your feedback, because this is what city government is about. the people.
And I'll add, folks, if you're listening to this podcast, you're going to enjoy the summit. If you enjoy this podcast, you're someone who's probably going to enjoy stopping at City Hall and
Hmm.
learning about City Hall and all the things that the city does. Because I believe you me, if you think you know everything the city does, you don't.
Oh my goodness.
Go to the city summit, the community summit, and bring your kids, bring your mom. Have a friend from out of town. Don't tell them where you're taking them. Take them to City Hall. It'll be worth it.
But don't you both
Yeah.
agree that it would be nice to see some new faces also? Because you'll see the same people at these kinds of events, I would guess, over and over again, just like you
Hmm.
see similar faces or the
Yeah.
same faces at city
And
council
city
meetings
council
over and
meetings
over
and
again.
whatever. Yes.
And it's nice to see new people. So the encouragement is to those who say, well, I've never done that. I would feel odd. It seems like there's just a certain in group that always shows up at these things. No, I mean, others
Well,
should do it.
I had an interesting. The mayor and I went down to the Missouri Municipal League, their legislative conference, a couple of weeks ago. We were sitting at a table, and there was from I forget what other community he was from, but he was talking about somebody had told him. He said, "When you're in city government, you'll have two cans of beans. One can is completely full, and one can has a dozen beans in it." And you pick them up and shake them both. The one that has a dozen beans makes the most noise, but it's the quiet one is a majority. So, to your point that it's the same ones that want to always show up, always, I borrow the line from Casablanca, the usual suspects that show up at every meeting and comment.
Well, I just want to point people to Nick's regular Como Vanguard when he makes references to those who are regular speakers, either at the beginning of a meeting or the end of the meeting. He has descriptive terms for those people
I
also.
uh I know who's coming up to the podium by the sound of their voice.
Yeah.
Even if I'm not there
Even if
or
you're
by
not
the
there, yeah,
reaction of
no,
council members on
you
the
know,
dais.
and
We all
so
know who's coming up.
yeah,
And Don, I just want to say that I guess what is that analogy, metaphor you just used for beans? Never heard that one in my life, but I love it.
yeah, no,
That's
I
a new
did
one.
too.
That's a
I
new
did
one.
too. It was like, yeah, that you're absolutely right. 'Cause it's I mentioned that I'm up for reelection. You go to the various forums, and there's a lot of different forums, and you walk in, and there's like 4 or 5 people on whatever interest group is decided to conduct the forum. Great. Okay, we'll sit down, we'll talk, we'll have our discussion, answer the questions, et cetera, et cetera. But then the usual commenters always complaining about this, that, or the other. And yet we do the community survey, and the majority of people in Columbia say, yes, this is either a great or a good place. Yeah. Part of me sometimes when I get a little snarky, I want to say, well, the naysayers need a better job of messaging because they're not getting the word out that Columbia is not that great. It's like, no, so the majority of people are, and I think in a way that's a good thing. If you're doing things right, if you're not hearing from people, they've either given up or you're doing things right. And I tend to go with, okay, we're doing things well, doing things mostly right. Yes, there's always room for improvement, whatever you do. Okay. Especially government. But I think that on the whole, we're doing a good job. There's obviously some things we can do better.
Well, Don, I think that's an excellent transition. What I wanted us to end on was you're up for reelection.
Yes.
You and Councilwoman Valerie Carroll out of the first ward.
Yes.
She does not have an opponent.
Right.
So congratulations, Valerie. You've won in a landslide. However, you have drawn an opponent. The election is April 7th.
Yes.
Again, Don Waterman, Ward 5. You're up for reelection. Comments.
Just people have asked me why. It's basically unfinished business. There were some things that I campaigned on. Police staffing, we've made great progress. Last 23 when I ran, we were about 40 officers short of what we were authorized. Today we're down to, I'm going to say 15. It kind of varies from day to day. We have a new academy class starting, I think it's this month. I don't know the number, but most of the classes have been around 12 to 15. And so that's where we're at. We're like 12 to 15 vacancies from 40. So we've done that. There's some infrastructure issues. The infamous water tower, still working on that. But the transmission line, something that was identified that needed to be done 10 years ago, it's still languishing out there for various reasons. But we're beginning the process to start bringing that back into the discussion. And I think there's a sentiment among council that to get this moving forward, to move it forward. There were a lot of things, again, for various reasons, it got stalled, but move that forward. And I want to keep pushing that. I want to so those are a couple of the things, the I-70 thing, I-70 improvement. that's a major infrastructure issue. But a lot of other things, the continued community involvement, we talked about the community summit that's happening in a couple of weeks. Those kinds of things, they're new, but I want to see those grow. Working with Ready to bring companies and develop the city. Okay. Not just manufacturing. I think a kind of a misconception it's easy to get into with Ready is you think they're all about manufacturing with I can't think of I don't know what it's called now, but it used to be the made the bacon, the prosciutto.
I was saying talking about the Italian meat
Yeah, the
processing
Italian meat.
facility.
Yes.
They did change the name.
Yeah, they
I don't
changed
remember
names.
what
I
it
don't
is
remember what
either.
it's called. American Outdoor Brands, other places like that, bringing those in. That's great. They provide jobs, but they don't generate the sales tax revenue that the city needs. But recently we had Trader Joe's. I was there for the first time a couple days ago. That place is still crawling with customers. Great success. We got Nordstrom Rack coming. That's another retail establishment. Kind of circling back to what talking about Columbia being a good place, those companies don't come into Columbia unless they can be reasonably assured they've got the customer base and it's going to be a good environment for them to be in. Ready also helps recruit that. And they've got a recruitment specialist. I think that I don't know the formal name of it, but a retail recruitment specialist that they're bringing on. So Ready, the chamber, so the business, I want to continue to promote that, everything that I can to promote that. So that's primarily while I'm running unfinished business. And we've got some things going, balls rolling, and I want to keep it going.
All right. So best way to contact Don Waterman, Ward 5 at como.gov.
Como.gov,
Any other
yep.
contact information you want to share
For
there?
the campaign, it's Don for Como 5th, Don for Como 5th at gmail.com. My website, Don for Como 5th.com. Go there, take a look at it. Care to donate? I always appreciate that, but just take a look at it. I have a social media page and I am behind for the campaign. I'm behind on getting that updated, but so those are probably the easiest ways. Again, go to the website or look in the newsletter that David mentioned earlier that comes with your utility bill. My email and phone number are in there, city phone. Reach out to me and I'll get back to you and we'll try to answer your questions.
All right. And for fairness purposes, his opponent is Christina Hartman.
Pardon
That
me?
is Christina with a CH. Her website is comochristina.org. She is
Yep.
challenging Don Waterman for the fifth ward. Again, we encourage everyone, get informed, get educated. Go to Don's website, go to Christina Hartman's website, reach out to them. We are all about civic engagement and we appreciate that
Yeah,
there is a competition for the seat.
she's a local business owner. In cybersecurity. And I will not say anything bad about her, and I don't, because to me, it's like you said, civic engagement, and that's what the whole thing is about, engagement. We can disagree on approaches, we can disagree on policies, but as long as we acknowledge, okay, we disagree, it doesn't make you bad because you disagree with me. Okay, it just means we disagree. So let's sit down, see if we can find something common in the middle, and then kind of find something that is satisfactory to both. It's not compromise is not I win, you lose. Okay. Although if you listen to a lot of the common current political commentary, that's kind of the way it comes across. It's not. Okay. I'm call me old school. Compromise is okay, you have your position, I have mine. Let's see if we can meet in the middle. That's a compromise. And that generally turns out to be the best for everyone.
Well, Don, we appreciate you very much coming on the show.
Thank you.
And David, you want to take it from there?
All right. It's the Como Vanguard podcast. And if you find this useful, leave a review, question us, challenge us on the podcast app of your choice. Share it with others who care about local government and submit questions.
That's right. And you can submit questions. You can support the show. You can find the written publication all on comovanguard.com. And as always, we also want to shout out our in-person host, the host with the most, Jay Sparks, Marcus Creek Consulting. Thank you for being our DJ and our producer and all these things. And thank you, listeners, for listening. We will catch you next time on the next episode of Como Vanguard.